I want to acknowledge those who were able to make this meeting. I know we are all finding a lot of meeting fatigue. There's so much happening in Boston. We want to make sure that we're staying tuned into what's happening. And so I get that another meeting is hard to come to. So thanks for coming tonight, and we'll try to make it worth your while. I think just by looking at the number of participants, we understand how important this park is to everyone. And so thank you. And this is really your opportunity to kind of shape the park that you use and you live next to. I also want to welcome any elected officials and staff who may be here tonight. I know I saw someone from Councilor Flaherty's office. There may be others. So if you want to say anything, please raise your hand and we can unmute you to say something.
Mary?
Hi, no, I'm here with Michael, Councilor Flaherty's office, and just here to listen and take some notes for him, and thank you for having this.
Great, thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
There's also someone here from Councilor Murphy's office.
Oh, great. Okay, so we have Councilor Murphy's office, Councilor Flaherty.
I'm gonna let them. Trip.
Hi, everyone. This is Trip Graham. I'm from Councilor at Large Aaron Murphy's office. Very happy to be here tonight and to listen in. We also, I know this is a review session, but we can provide a few links that Councilor Murphy is really looking into, some initiatives, some grant programs, small business grant programs, some things for kids and some things for the elderly that we can share with you all. If you need to reach us, I'll put our contact information in the chat. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. I also want to just recognize Councilor Flynn and Representative Beal, who have been really active. Councilor Ruth Z been active with Moakley Park at the event. So I really appreciate everyone coming out and supporting the project and learning more about it. So before we jump into our presentation, I'd just like to go over a few how-tos and what to expect. Can we move to the next slide? Great. Interpretation was not requested for this meeting. However, I just want everyone to know that we do offer interpretation and translation services to the City of Boston as long as they're requested. So if you're interested in something like that, please reach out to me. My email is on the slide there. I think almost everyone is joining us via video so they can see that. Great. Next slide. So, yep, that's right. Meeting recording. And acknowledgement of those who were unable to attend tonight, we are recording the meeting and we'll post to the project website. So please share what you learned tonight and direct your friends and neighbors and family to the website where they can watch it as their schedule allows. I also want to acknowledge that the Parks Department continues to offer community engagement online, but we are seeing some changes happening as we start to kind of reopen the city. And so we would love to hear your feedback in terms of what's worked for you with engagement, what hasn't, and what you would like to see in the future. And so if you want to if there's something that comes to mind now, you can just add it to the chat. Just, let us know, did online work for you? Did it not work for you? Let us know your thoughts in the chat. Otherwise, you can just email me as well. Next slide. We want to ensure that this conversation feels accessible to everyone and each one of you feels comfortable sharing your questions and comments. So please be respectful and mindful of others' time so everyone has the opportunity to participate. Keep questions project specific and not personal to encourage conversation, which is solution driven. I also want to, again, put my email out there in terms of people being able to reach out to me. Sometimes there's something that comes up after the meeting that you want to talk to me about. Please just reach out to me via email. I'm happy to answer your questions. Next slide. So tonight's meeting is held in Zoom meetings, which allows us to see each other, which is exciting. It's a little closer to in-person engagement, not quite there, but it's nice to see everybody's faces and to see a lot of new faces and some familiar faces. So being online, we ask for you to follow a few rules so that we can make sure the meeting goes smoothly. First, during the presentation portion, we ask you to keep your microphone off. However, you can use the nonverbal responses, which are on the bottom of your screen, or at least they're on mine, and they're the little kind of reaction buttons. And you can let us know how we're doing. In particular, if you like something, give us a thumbs up. I often like that one. And then also just adding to the chat. So if something pops up in your head in terms of a comment or a question, you can go ahead and add it to the chat. And then during the discussion period, we will visit the chat questions to provide answers, or you can verbally ask a question by using the raise hand feature. And we'll call on you, at which point you can unmute yourself. That's also at the bottom of the screen there. If you're joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself when called upon. And please note all questions will be held to the end or after the presentation. Please, that takes care of all the housekeeping information. So next slide. So today I'll introduce the project team, and we will go through a little bit in terms of why we think Moakley is so important, and then we'll provide a brief project overview of what we've been doing, what we've done in the past, and then our design team will present the schematic plan and phase 1 design and wrap up with next steps. At which point we'll open up for a question and listening session. Next slide. Great, so I've already introduced myself. I'm Allison Perlman, I'm the project manager, Boston Parks. And we have an exceptional team that supports my work that I do. And so I want to acknowledge everyone here. Commissioner from Parks and Recreation, Ryan Woods, and Chief Landscape Architect, Liza Meyer, have really been part of the project from the very beginning and provided guidance on design, operations, and maintenance, and park partnerships. We're also joined by Christine, who is really our Zoom expert, but she also helps us for friends groups and supports park programs. And then I also want to recognize, although she's not on this screen, I believe if she's not here, she's been really supportive, Haley Dillon, who's from the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services, who really has helped us connect with more people in the neighborhood. I also want to recognize our park partners, Boston Harbor Now and South Boston Neighborhood House. These park champions help us deliver the public realm you all deserve. Tonight, we're joined by Boston Harbor Now's Jen McKeem, who is an engagement specialist and is helping us connect to more residents on this project. And then we have our amazing design team, Weston Sampson and Stas. So Sherry, do you mind introducing the team?
Not at all. First, I'd like to introduce Amy Whitesides. She is a principal at Stas Landscape Urbanism. And Allison Wright, who is operating as the project manager on the Stas side. And we have a bunch of folks from Weston and Sampson on, but I'll stick to Jonathan Law, who is the PM on this project from our side. And you may hear from a few other folks in the presentation on the team. And I'm Sherry Ruane, the principal in charge for Weston and Sampson.
Great, thank you, Sherry. Okay, next slide. Okay, so why Moakley? We believe that the greatest asset we have are the current infrastructure within and adjacent to Moakley Park. The park is adjacent to one of the best urban beaches, in my mind, Carson Beach, and the Boston Harbor. But it's also surrounded by a vibrant, diverse community, including Old Colony and Maryland McCormick. Moakley Park is 60 acres of significant Boston open space, which serves not only South Boston, but other Boston neighborhoods. We believe the park can continue to provide recreation and also reconnect the community to each other and the waterfront. Next slide. We also acknowledge that we are already seeing climate impacts to our neighborhoods, including stormwater flooding and an increase in hot summer days. Next slide. As the future projections, we see more of this. Here we see projected flood pathways from the park and the Bayside site, which in combination with Fort Point, which is from the north here, and from the south, Morrissey Boulevard, impact South Boston and many neighborhoods beyond. The City of Boston knows we'll have to implement different resiliency strategies, and here at Moakley Park, we have the opportunity to create a park which can serve as critical infrastructure, both for flood and heat protection, and also meets the many daily needs of the community. Next slide. So next, I kind of want to go into where we've been previous to early 2021. But before we do that, I would love to kind of understand who's in the room. I see a lot of familiar names. I see some new names. So I just want to get a sense of how you've engaged or if this is your first time. So if you remember, the raise hand is in the bottom icon. And if everyone who has participated in at least one community meeting, could you raise your hand? Great, so it looks like there's quite a few people that have participated in at least one meeting. When I'm looking at these names, I'm thinking, you know what, you've definitely joined more than one meeting. Okay, can you put your hands down? Great. And can you raise your hand if you have joined us for other events, such as park cleanups or the Mary Moakley event or other types of events like that? Can you raise your hand? Great. Okay, and put down your hands. And then finally, this is my last question, and then I'll leave you guys alone until the end. But can you raise your hand if this is the first time that you're engaging on the Moakley Park project in terms of a meeting or an event? You haven't done any of these. This is the first time you're hearing about Moakley Park. Okay. Well, you know, there is not a lot of people raise your hands, and I don't know if it's because you just don't know how to use the icon. Hopefully that's not the case. But there's a handful of new people, but a lot of people have been joining us along the way, and so that's fantastic. And I welcome the new people that have joined the conversation because we are so open to having more people come into this conversation. Great, so as you can see from this slide, from 2018 to early 2021, we did a lot of engagement. It was a multifaceted strategy. Many of you have gone to these events, but it kind of ranged from public traditional meetings, open houses, to bike rides and going to events and talking to people, organizations and talking to people. And that really has opened up our opportunities in terms of planning for the park, right? Understanding what's really important to people and really learning from the experts of our neighborhoods. What is important to you? So next slide. So this engagement led to the collective creation of goals and values for the Moakley Park project, the foundation of which is creating a more inclusive and accessible park. Within this framework, we seek to foster a highly engaging and active park experience, develop community-driven, culturally relevant programming, and promote public health and social connection, and create a safe and well-maintained, resilient park. Next slide. So where we've been since the last meeting, we've been doing a lot of work this last year from early 2021 till now. And we're just really thinking about how do we make sure the schematic design is well grounded in a better understanding of the current and future conditions. This has involved studies to better understand what's below the surface of the park. So soil samples and borings. We've collected a lot of data on groundwater and stormwater conditions. And this is all really to inform what we can build and how we build it. The team also reviewed the design through modeling to see how it would handle future conditions, including coastal and stormwater and groundwater conditions. And this work continues. It's a lot of work. We really want to make sure that we understand these conditions and we build a park that will last for many centuries. So you'll see this work starting again April 18th. There'll be some equipment on site. We are very careful on not trying to interrupt any of the recreation that's starting up again. So, but you will see the equipment there earlier in the day. Next slide. So in addition, we've been developing a plan on how to manage and care for this park once complete. We've met with many organizations and nonprofits to understand what is the right fit for Moakley. How can public, private, nonprofit partnerships help to deliver care for Moakley, which exceeds what we've provided in the past at Moakley? We still have more work, but we see this as an opportunity to build and strengthen community partnerships, enhance programming, and hopefully support workforce development goals. Next slide. We've also been busy coordinating with other city departments and state agencies. Honestly, this is a huge list, but I believe that we've probably been coordinating with more. And as you all know, there's a lot of planning efforts happening. So while these efforts are outside parks jurisdiction, we've heard how important it is to the community for the city and the state to think about this area comprehensively. And so we are doing that, and we're making sure that we are in conversations where these mini plans are happening. Next slide. And finally, the early work from 2021 to present also includes these kind of early action items. We've heard how important maintenance and programming is to the community, and as a result, our partnerships with Boston Harbor Now and South Boston Neighborhood House have helped us deliver an array of park events and volunteer activities this past year. Some of these events include the Merry Moakley event, Winter Warmer, Moakley Park and Carson Beach Summer Send-Off, Park Planting, Summer Youth Engagement Talks, and Moakley Park Cleanups. These cleanups are starting back up again this Saturday, so we could add the link for the events for the park cleanups to the chat. That would be great in case you guys want to join us. And then finally, the creation of a Moakley Park Community Garden. Our partner Roundtable Inc. has secured a grant through the Mayor's Office of Food Access to help folks grow food, reconnect community, and share garden tips. Today, we received our first delivery of soil, so we're pretty excited. These efforts will continue, so please visit our website for updates. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy now so she can share with you how your input has transformed the schematic plan.
Thanks, Allison. If we can, perfect, thank you. So what you can see here is the current schematic design plan for the park. As Allison mentioned, it's built off the feedback that we got along the way and is designed to address a number of the kind of issues and opportunities that Allison just covered. I'll run you through a couple highlights here and then a number of slides where we'll get into a little bit more detail. A number of these, for those of you who have been here before, a number of the highlights in blue have been in the plan for a long time. Things like increasing biodiversity, increasing tree canopy, improving play areas, restrooms, and the flood management alignment. And a few new kind of great highlights that came out of conversations with you are this harbor overlook and a place for kind of picnic and barbecues. The entry plaza as a space for events and food trucks and farmers markets, and then the community garden kind of at this gateway here for the park where it says, sorry, you can't see my cursor, where it says Garden Gateway. Yeah, thank you. And then the waterfront plaza and amphitheater, again, another place for kind of markets, trucks, those kinds of things that we heard a lot of interest in. Next slide. In plan, just looking at that all in a different view, the red line there gives you a better sense of where that coastal flood protection barrier is going through the park. In addition here, you can start to see where some of the kind of restrooms and areas for parking are really dispersed throughout the park that maybe is harder to see in the other view. The park is really developed with the goal of welcoming a really broad range of users. So I'll run you through a series of examples of how these maybe different kinds of visitors might experience the park. So if we go to the next slide. Starting off with a family. So as an example, the pathways dashed in red here are show 3 different connections from what we see as primary points of access into the park. So from Mary Ellen McCormick and Old Colony, and even Andrew T, as well as JFK T to the south, and then over to the beach. And so people really coming to and from Carson. The key points of interest kind of along these different routes that I want to point out are the entry plazas. There's one there at Preble Circle that has some water play and other kind of playful events, as well as a community building and a pavilion. Then there's what we're calling the Garden Gateway, which houses the community gardens, but also some other great activities that I'll talk about in a minute. And then on the Waterfront Plaza, which again, has some water play and space for community gathering. Probably one of the most exciting spaces for a family is the Adventure Playground, which is really centered right in the middle of the park and is kind of right along any of those pathways into the park. And also I'll talk about shortly the overlook and barbecue picnic area. Again, want to point out that restrooms and cooling stations for hot days, as well as some kind of smaller informal play areas, are also dispersed along these different pathways. The next slide. As I mentioned, the adventure play area, as you can see here, is really kind of one of the more exciting moments for families, and it's really about a place where there's a lot of natural elements and different types of play equipment for really people of all ages. Next slide. The next kind of primary user we want to talk about is the athlete. So athletics is, of course, an important part of the park today. It remains at the core of the park moving forward. And in addition to the multi-use baseball, softball, little league, and football fields that are there today and we're retaining. There are also, we were adding in a running track that runs around the park edge in blue, kind of a series of walkways or walking pathways, including this sort of yellow community path that is adjacent to the running path. And then the series of little blue dashed lines are kind of different circuits that someone walking might come enjoy in the park. In addition, we've added a skate park. And then we've kind of reorganized a little bit some of the basketball and tennis courts, but those are remaining in the park, as is the street hockey, which will remain in its current location today. Next slide. Oh, sorry. One important thing to say about that is that on all of these, many of these surfacing and lighting will be improved through the changes in the park, and very importantly, stormwater management. So the fields are no longer flooding when it rains, and the surfaces are really well adapted to the types of uses that we've heard from you on. Great. So next slide. So the stadium will remain in its current location for the most part, with some renovations that are needed in order to upgrade the structure. And this will allow it to continue to serve the recreational needs that it already serves. But in addition to that, kind of allow it to operate as a multi-use space. So events and fitness can happen, as well as sledding, or even kind of, a movie or something like that might take advantage of the seating and the slope that will be there as in the renovated version. Next slide. So the community, there's a very wide range of kind of activities that are intended for building community and creating sort of community focused events. This includes the stadium space that I just mentioned, in addition to the plazas that I described earlier. So 3 key assets that I want to just focus in on here are the community gardens that that are at the entryway closest to Mary Ellen McCormick, and we'll be working closely with the community on developing those as we move forward. The community building itself, which is in the plaza near Preble Circle. The community building is really centered around, the ability to host events here, birthday parties, games, and also to be able to act as kind of a resiliency hub. So emergency services, vaccines, these kinds of things might be able to be offered out of that building in the future. And then lastly, the overlook and barbecue area is another really great community space where people can come together. And if you go to the next slide, this is, a view looking from that that community barbecue area and the overlook, where really you can see into the coastal landscape that's on the waterfront side of the berm that is operating as coastal flood protection. And then, and you can see out into the harbor. So this is really kind of an amazing space where community can really gather together in the park. Next. A variety of more passive activities and opportunities for discovery are also planned within the park. So the coastal dunes that we were just looking at from the overlook on the harbor side of the park will promote nature walks and bird watching, while table games, bocce, adult swings, and things like that can take place in the Garden Gateway Plaza that I've mentioned before. All these spaces are intended to allow for connection and play. And then we have also a series of kind of smaller gardens and a number of different types of places to sit and relax that are dispersed throughout. Next slide, please. This image then is giving you a sense of what it's like to cross the street. This is crossing Old Colony from the Mary Ellen McCormick side of the park. Entering the park into this kind of garden gateway where we have table games, community gardens. You can see some seating, different kinds of seating, swings, the running track, and the kind of community walkway, and a nice shaded walkway there at the front. Next, please. Resiliency and environmental concerns are really driving a lot of what we're doing in the park and have been a strong interest from the community. So you can see here, in addition to the coastal barrier, we're really looking a lot at stormwater management as a critical part of the infrastructure of the park, as well as just tree canopy and how can we expand the canopy moving forward, both in more trees, but also more different types of trees. So there's just more diversity and a little bit more kind of shade and places to cool off on a hot day. Next, please. So again, as I mentioned before, this kind of coastal flood protection, what is that? That's essentially what you see here on the left where it says core wall. That's a wall that's basically running through the park, but is embedded in the landscape. So you'll never really see it as a wall. It'll look like topography within the park, just like you see it here, where in this instance, this is at the waterfront plaza. The wall, in front of the wall is this nice kind of landscape berm, and then on the back side, a kind of amphitheater. If you go to the next slide, that amphitheater and the plaza in front of it really are then allowed to flood in a large storm in the future. So this is assuming kind of 40 inches of sea level rise, many years from now, but will allow us to kind of protect all the fields and all the other exciting, the play that lie behind this. Just a quick note, since I'm sure someone will ask, that the height of that berm is roughly 6 feet from the existing condition today. So we can talk more about that later. Next, please. So lastly, just this is really, you can see that core wall running the length of the park down from the foreground here down to the stadium, and you can really get the sense of how it's really embedded in the landscape, and that there's then these really coastal landscapes and dunes that are promoting sort of passive recreation on the waterfront side and connecting to the beach. Areas to be up at that highest point where you really get a view out to the harbor. And then on the community side of that berm, we have all of the fields, the play area. And then the last thing that I think is really important is this building that we see in the foreground, which is a new operations and maintenance building that's really making a commitment to maintaining this park and really keeping the investment in top shape and having a kind of a continuous presence of care at the park. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Sherry.
Thanks. And I think, yep, perfect. So I'm going to talk just very briefly about the first phase of work, which we are really excited to get started on. And that is the area that you see outlined on this slide right here. And the next slide is a bit of a zoom in on that. And really, Amy just walked you through a lot of the programming. So I'm just going to do a brief summary. You can stay on the zoom in, Farah. Thanks. So you can see here that that phase really does include that coastal landscape that you just saw a view of that's closest to Day Boulevard. And that's the naturalized systems with boardwalks and the overlook on the edge, the Old Harbor overlook that you saw with areas for barbecue and picnicking. There will be a section of the berm that's constructed in this first phase, and that's the red dashed line. And that is the flood protection measure. And actually this edge of the park is one of the more vulnerable edges. And so this is one of the reasons that this phase is being implemented first. And then just on the other side of the barrier, you see the footprint of the building. And that was in the view that Amy just showed you. And in addition to the operations and maintenance, which is again critical to the upkeep of this 60-acre park, there also will be public restrooms, which we know is a super important part of the improvements to Moakley. There will be parking and storage areas for the O&M operations, a community plaza, which you can see a precedent image of above, and then the premier baseball field, which will have scoreboard and lighting and batting cages and bleachers and all of the appurtenances needed to really put out a top-notch ball field. And we know that that has been a long sought-after resource in South Boston and at the park. So stitching all of these things together are the circulation, the earthwork that Amy showed you some images of, and a planting plan. And I did see one of the questions in the chat from Heidi about loving all of the additional trees being proposed, and a question about how many existing trees were going to be taken down. And the goal is to keep as many of the healthy trees as possible. So in many ways, the design has been put in place around a lot of the existing healthy trees. And so the goal is to keep all of the healthy trees that exist and will remain. And then part of this too, of course, are all the things that you don't see that Amy alluded to, and that's stormwater systems. There will be underground stormwater chambers under the ball field, some of the stormwater management systems in the dune landscape, and also some of the tree plantings are going to be helping to reduce urban heat island effect. So lots of pieces that really aren't necessarily super obvious, but are all woven into this first phase of implementation. And the next slide shows really just the schedule. So here we are at public meeting number 1. We're going to begin design development, and that means really putting pencil to paper or mouse to mouse pad and working out the details of the design, how it's graded, how the drainage is going to work, and more of the details. And so we're going to be back to meet with you folks again in June. And what we need from you is feedback on how these designs are really evolving. So what is the community plaza really looking like? What are some of the details of the more naturalized landscape? Those types of questions are things that we're going to be asking you to give us feedback on materials that we'll present. Based on that information, we will push forward with construction documents. And those are essentially drawings and specifications that allow us to then go out to bid, which would be happening in about the third quarter of 2023. And then the goal is to have construction starting right around the end of 2023, beginning of 2024. And while all of this is happening, environmental permitting will be concurrently ongoing. And so that's meeting with all of the various agencies that need to weigh in on the changes that we're proposing so that they can evaluate the drawings themselves and make sure that all of the interventions are approved. And so that happens all at the same time. And all of these processes are informing each other. So the public engagement is helping to inform design development, which then gets fed into the permitting and then back into the construction documents. And I think, so just so folks have an understanding of what next steps are, as I mentioned, the community meeting in June, you will be seeing action out at the site. We have borings and site inspections that'll be going on actually in the next couple of weeks. As I mentioned, the permitting is going to be happening, and then we'll get into phase 1 construction. But we will be back in front of you in June after you've seen the boring rigs out there, and that'll actually provide us with some more information that we'll be able to share with you and that will help inform the design as well. And with that, I believe I'd ask, Allison, if I missed anything, chime in. Amy, if there's anything else we should include, but I think that I'll hand it off to you, Allison.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions, and I also want to reiterate that we've heard so
Sorry
much.
to cut you off, Allison. You sound pretty low. I can barely hear you. If you want to.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So I just want to acknowledge all the feedback that we've heard starting in 2018 till this point. We've had so many conversations, whether it's through meetings or one-on-one, understanding kind of what's really important to the community. And so with respect to all of that work that's happened, I want to kind of elevate that has really given us the plan that you see today. And also, there's still so much room for people to join in this conversation and let us know what's really important. I started to see some of the chat questions or just more kind of like, what's there? What are we doing? There's also kind of more specific ideas. And those specific ideas really start coming out in these phased construction document design periods where people are like, do you have any benches with shade? So those are the things that we really want to hear from people, what's really important to you in the details. And it seems to be that everyone's really kind of focused on those as well. So we're excited to hear from you. I kind of want to just open it up. We can maybe kick it off with a couple of chat questions. And then if people have questions, please, if you want to just raise your hands, we can call on you as well and you can ask them directly.
Sonal?
Hi, good evening. Thanks. I think as a South Boston resident, it looks really exciting. I did notice, is there any thoughts about expanding the tennis court? Because I know in the past when I tried to take my solar, it's been times during the summer when everything is blocked and there's no light. You can't really use it out into the night.
So Mel, I think your sound is a little bit difficult. It's coming through a little odd.
Is this better? Sorry, is this better?
Yeah, so far that's better.
All right, so I was just asking, was there any thoughts about expanding the number of tennis courts? And then the second feedback is currently as they stand, they get pretty packed during the summer. I definitely, they came in very useful during COVID and activities for me to take my middle schooler to, but we found in the summers the courts are just packed. the tennis courts specifically.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I well, sound challenges over here. But so what I hear from you is one, you're saying, hey, we love tennis, and it doesn't seem like there's enough time for people to play, and because there's such a demand. So basically, what we're trying to understand, we're trying to come up with kind of a plan that meets everyone's needs. So we've heard that tennis is really important. We've also heard that basketball is really important, and so we're trying to kind of balance those uses. The one thing that we have done, we've kind of kept the basketball and the tennis courts the same number that's existing there, but we're adding lighting, which I think is really going to improve the of the courts so that people can play from, into the evenings, especially as it gets darker in the fall, they can play longer. And so hopefully that'll kind of ease up on some of that pressure on the courts.
The other thing that I just wanted to give, I'm sorry, the other thing I just wanted to give feedback, in the past, I have noticed when the city creates, these parks for kids and water areas, is that there's a lot of the times when collegers will come and infiltrate the areas, bringing either smoking or drinking and just hanging out in these parks, which, has caused in the past where it does not remain a kid-friendly zone anymore, and things get deteriorated very quickly. So I think that's also something to consider, just as feedback.
Great, thank you. We are considering all those things, and we're thinking about how do we, again, I mentioned park partnerships, so how do we program the space from morning to night so that there's a lot of different folks, whether it's kids, all up to the 100 years of age, and starting to bring more people to the park. So in some ways that deters some of that behavior. And there's also so many spaces within this park. It's 60 acres, so we're kind of trying to think about creating niches for all different types of folks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
If I could just also add, I think Sonal had asked a question in the chat that was a good one, that was about plans for an enclosed building or something that could be used all around. And I just wanted to point out that community building that I mentioned a couple times in the kind of Preble Circle Plaza, that building is intended to be something that could be used all year round. So just to answer that.
Mandy? Mary, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, is it for me, Mary Moore?
Yes, sorry. I meant Mary.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for all the work that's gone into this. And a little shout out of thank you to Allison for all of her hard work and listening to everybody with their concerns and wish lists and all the rest, and that includes me. I'm trying to get a better feel for what this park is going to look like closer to where I'm located and what my particular interest is, which is Andrews Square. I've been kind of pretty clear, I think, from the start of this about hoping that there's area carved out near our neighborhood where we can have just a local park, not sports fields and all of that, but a place where we can go with a folding chair and a football and hang out on a Sunday and have some open space. And I wondered, I'm just not quite getting it by looking at the plan, and wondered if I'm just not seeing it. In fact, that's what it's going to shape up to be, close to our neighborhood, a good solid neighborhood open space.
Amy or Sherry, do you want to take that question in terms of kind of the area that's closest to Andrews Square?
Yeah, and Farah, if we could jump back to that overall aerial. Yeah, sure. That's great. So Amy, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. Yeah, so there are a few, I think, the goal really in many ways is to have a lot of different experiences dispersed throughout the park, because I think for the reason you described, people are really coming from a lot of different places. And so we want to have a variety of experiences as you move through the park, and also so that, someone might come and kind of spend a day, have a different kinds of activities. So what you see, a few places that I think get at what you're asking about are right at the Preble Circle area. There's kind of an entry plaza area. That's where the community building is. That's maybe a little bit more, it'll change in character, right? Depending on the day. If it's a day when there are food trucks or a farmer's market, it might be a little bit more of an active space. But there's also some, softer landscapes and planting that are kind of integrated in and around that. So it could be a place where, you are just, someone might on a non-market day, you might be quieter and more of a relaxing kind of space. Just to the south from that is the Garden Gateway area, which involves the community gardens, and then also a pretty good area of that is intended to be more like lightweight kinds of seats, table games, things like this in and among the trees. So kind of a nice shaded place to just sit and relax. At the edges of all of those areas are some sort of, softer kind of greener elements of the park. And then one other area that is on this side of the park, kind of closer to the Andrew Square area, is this, what's called the Community Plaza right now. That is, I think, as Sherry described, that's one that is not yet really fully designed, and something that we want to, as we go into the phase 1 process, something that we really want to let it evolve, and kind of as we get input, what is it that the community that's closest to this area, the Old Colony area and Andrew, folks from Andrew area really want, so that's going to be part of our kind of engagement process, is to learn more about the possibilities there. The last thing I'll say, which relates to your question, though it's not specifically in the Andrew area, is this beachfront flex field. That's really, a lawn where, you could come and throw a Frisbee around with friends. It's not programmed. It's not intended to be for game, specific types of athletic events and that kind of thing. And then of course the overlook and barbecue and picnic area, again, is a place where you really do get a really nice view of the coastal landscapes on the other side of it, and can kind of, sit and relax in and among that. So kind of a variety dispersed throughout, basically.
And I want to add, looking at the plan view, it feels like these spaces are small, adjacent to the sports fields that they're next to, but they're actually really big, and we've looked at them. Unfortunately, we don't have an image tonight in this slide deck that shows that Preble Plaza area, but it's actually pretty big, and we keep on going back and be like, is this the right feel? Is this, this is maybe too big? Let's figure out, let's pull it here and pull it there and push it. This is really, it's a space that has a lot happening, and it has like a small playground, and it has a water play element, and it has all these really fun, exciting things there. And it's a place where people can also go, for the farmer's market, or, just go and meet neighbors. And so I think it also, as Amy mentioned, it's next to the Community Resiliency Hub, where that kind of opens up and can provide a space for the community together as well. So these spaces, while they look dwarfed next to the large fields, they're actually pretty big, and you don't want them too big because they're going to feel a little bit awkward if it's not like big crowds gathering. And so I think as we jump into those phases, we can start to kind of give you a feel for that experience. And I think you'll find that there are some really exciting design elements that are close to Andrew Square.
Susan?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for taking my question slash comment. I just want to say, as someone who has lived on the opposite side of South Boston, the far east side of town, that moved here in 2012 to Preble, Andrew Square area, when everyone thought I was you know what, crazy. This is, it's unfortunately the first time I've been able to join one of these calls, but I've been following the project, and I, for one, am really excited and think that the work you guys are doing right here is nothing short of Herculean, to get it hopefully to where this these slides are from where it is now is going to be just absolutely incredible for the entire community. And I think just a kudos to you, because there's never going to be enough tennis courts. There's never going to be enough soccer fields for the soccer players, baseball fields for the baseball players, and, you know, tracks for the runners. But it's enough for everyone. And I just think it's fantastic. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I really appreciate those comments.
Mary?
Hey there, sorry, it's me again. I didn't get to finish my questions, so I apologize for coming back in. I have a few more questions about this. Number one, can you speak to parking, which I think could impact our neighborhood quite a bit? Wondering where you are seeing parking options in this plan. That's number one.
Sure, I can take that question. So on the plan here, you see can someone show with their cursor where the parking areas are? Sorry, go back to the, oh, here we go.
Does this help just because of,
yes. Thank you. So we have, you can see the gray with the P are areas where we're showing parking. So we have parking adjacent to the O&M building. We have parking next to the community building, parking next to that southern end near the stadium, and then parking on the other side of the stadium. But I do want to acknowledge that, you know, the city is really looking at how do we minimize car trips to different areas. I certainly don't want to imply that we are encouraging people to be driving to this park, because it really is adjacent to a significant amount of public transportation. We have JFK to the south there, we've got Andrew Square to the north, and in addition, we have a lot of bus routes that run along Old Colony. And so those are the things that we're really going to be thinking about, of how do we really encourage people to be using and accessing these systems, and the bike pathways. So that's kind of a piece of it, is how do we think about, with the programming that we're going to be doing in events and different kind of recreation, and how do we start to have that conversation and make it so that that's a easier solution for people. And part of that is just rethinking some of the connections, right? Because coming from JFK is very, very difficult, especially if you're lugging a bunch of, you know, gear or your picnic basket. And so we're working with a lot of pedestrian focused organizations and thinking about those access connections and thinking about how do we elevate these concerns to the folks that that's within their jurisdiction. So whether it's BTD or the state, Mass DOT or DCR and an MBTA, and thinking about how do we make those better connections and make it easier and more enjoyable for people to use public transportation. So that's one piece of it. we're adding, as I mentioned, we're adding some parking so that, people that really need to drive, let's say for a baseball game and bring a bunch of equipment, that they have access to do that. Or there's a drop off, at the community building. So there's those options as well. And then we're working with our kind of partners offsite and thinking about if there's a big event, is there a way that we can think about using parking off hours for certain events? So we're thinking about all of those things because we really acknowledge that there is a community here. We don't want to try to imply that we are building this huge park and we're expecting people to all drive here and drive their cars here.
Do you know how many cars those parking lots are going to accommodate?
I do not off the top of my head. Amy may know.
The other questions I have are the programming aspect of this. Are you hiring somebody to program for Moakley? Is that how it's going to work? Or, how is that going to happen, the programming piece?
That's a great question. So right now we're adding more programming through partnerships. We think that that's going to continue to think about how do we partner with all the great organizations that are around here. And so we're continuing to do that. We've done that with Boston Harbor now. We've done that with South Boston Neighborhood House. And we're seeing a lot of excitement around that. I think at the level of what we're kind of thinking about and what we've heard from the community that's important to them, we're thinking that we really need to think about, that's kind of where I was going with the governance structure and thinking about what does that look like? What does the maintenance and the programming look like to kind of meet that need? And so Parks Department simply can't do all of that on our own, and we're going to have to partner, and that may be in the form of a formation of a friends group or a nonprofit to kind of meet that need. And that's what we're looking at right now is one, what would that look like? And then two, how would we fund that? And so those are all things that we're still working on, and hopefully we'll have an answer sooner rather than later because we're really excited to kind of bring a high level of programming as soon as we can to the park.
Is it possible to expand the community garden to so that other folks would have the opportunity to participate in that?
Are you asking about the current community garden?
Yeah, I understand that you have a community garden, but I'm not sure how those spots are being sort of allotted or lotteried. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to expand that so more people have access.
Sure. So right now we're kind of using the model of collaboration gardening, and so no one person owns a bed. This has worked really well in communities where we're seeing that a lot of people really want to come together and to garden together, but often there's just not enough space, and so really anyone who wants to participate in the garden can. As long as they understand this is a collaboration and that you grow food together and you pick food together, and so I think if people are interested, yes, they should reach out and we can connect them with the right folks to be part of that. In addition, this is just the one that we have on site as a pilot project, and so we're looking at how that works. Is it big enough? Would we need more space? And so at some point we'll kind of revisit that and see do we need to expand the pilot. I know that George from Roundtable would love to do that, but we haven't even built the existing one yet. But then also, how does that impact the overall design of where the community garden is going to go, and thinking about the size of that as well.
Okay, and my last question is, can you address anything about the funding? How that's going in terms of piecing together the funding to make this a reality?
So thank you. That's a good question. And I love that you said piecing together, because that is a huge piece of it, right? Is that it's going to take a lot. And I think that what we're looking at is phase one, we've kind of think that we understand where that funding can come from. And that's kind of a mix of different types of, city and state and federal, hopefully. And then, thinking about the rest of the park. And so it is really about us. This is part of the governance structure question, is how do we think about funding the park with multiple layers of funding? So it's city, it's state, it's federal, and it's private. And all of those funding structures will have to come into place to kind of make this a full reality. And so we're working on that. We're really excited. I think we have an announcement coming out soon that we are seeing a lot of momentum and support for this project. And so, I think that it's going to take us, no one has asked this question in terms of what's the full build out, but we do think it's going to take 10 to 15 years. And I think that that's a good timeline to think about how do we start to layer in the different funding strategies. And in addition to lessen the impacts on the community. So if we were to build the whole thing at once, it would be a really big deal to take a park 60 acres offline. It would impact a lot of people, especially with so much activity happening in this area as well. So that'll give us a timeline to figure out, one, like how to get the funding in place, how do we coordinate well with all the other planning efforts that are happening, how do we think about the impacts to the users, and then we can move it forward as a full build out in that kind of 10 to 15 year timeline. Thank you, Mary.
And just so everyone knows, I've been trying to respond to individuals who have had questions in the chat. A few folks jumped off before I could get to them, but we will copy the chat and we can do a Q&A summary as follow-up.
Great. Are there any other chat questions that we didn't get to with folks online still?
I think most have been addressed. I do love the suggestion of a 7 days a week MBTA bus service between Andrew and JFK. But I think almost all of the others have been addressed.
I think there's maybe one here with the bike parking. Did someone answer that? Yes, we will have bike parking. I guess bike and scooter parking.
Someone did have a question about being dog friendly.
It's a good question. So again, we haven't really, we're working on the governance structure and all the park rules. But I never really understand exactly what dog friendly is. Yes, right now today it said dogs on leash are welcome. It will likely continue to be that. We're kind of balancing people who love their dogs and then people who love their children, and there's a little bit of a conflict when you let your dogs off leash, and so there's some concerns there. But so it will likely be a dogs on leash, and in addition, it is adjacent to the dog park just up the street at the state property. Just one more thing. I want to be really clear that I guess I wasn't clear in my answer directly in the chat, but this presentation, the presentation itself and the recording of the presentation will be on our website next week. Okay, sorry, Amy.
No, there was a question about the swings and location of some of those things, and the especially kind of adult oriented. So there will be, I mean, some of these things will be really distributed throughout the park, kind of places for some more casual, I don't want it, not fully passive, but, not like a big, huge playground, but smaller kind of play areas that will be oriented towards different ages. I think the specific swings that I mentioned in the presentation were at the kind of garden gateway area. I don't know if Farah, you can highlight where that is on the plan here with your cursor. Yeah, in that area, there's currently, the thinking is there would be some kind of swings that are a little bit more geared towards adult, sitting, not so much like kids play swings. We are also looking at places for things like poles for hammocks, those kinds of things. So there's really a wide range of places to sit and places to hang out in a little bit more of a fun way, but that's not exactly a playground. And there was also a question about bike and scooter parking. I think that well, right now there's not, that's something, I think that's something that will come into the phases, you know, as we design each phase, we'll figure out where those are, but we definitely recognize that, you know, parking, and because, especially because we're encouraging people to not be parking their cars and, you know, be coming by other means, then ensuring that there's plenty of spots for people to park their other forms of transportation is really important.
Great, so it looks like we've got through most of it. I will make sure to go through the chat and confirm that everyone was either answered out loud or in the chat. And if there is something that wasn't answered, I will reach out directly to you as a follow-up. So I just want to say thank you all for coming. I love that there were so many familiar faces here tonight. It is a Make Moakley Yours process, and it takes us a while to kind of get into the details. And so I'm happy that so many people have been here from the beginning and helped guide it to where it is today. And I'm really excited that there's new people joining us. I think this park is really something special, as I mentioned in the beginning, you know, not just because of all the challenges we face, but also just the community that surrounds it. And it's such a unique situation in such a dense city to have 60 acres that's adjacent to a community that's going to be there for a while. And there's, you know, community that's very close, that's been here for decades, generation after generation. And so having everyone contribute to this plan, I think is going to really make it something special. So thank you. Please feel free to reach out to me in the interim, and keep an eye out for our June meeting. And then also please join us at the park cleanup events. It's a great time to kind of chat, and we can talk about any questions you have there, or just spend some time in the park. The folks around there have really, really appreciated the volunteer help that people have brought to the park, and just seeing it activated in different ways has been exciting. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and we will chat soon.
Thank you.